Welcome, Whispering Bee family. Today's story begins with a boy who lost everything at 23 and chose to become everything his little sister needed. Sebastian didn't just raise Lila, he built his entire life around her, sacrificing dreams, time, and pieces of himself so she would never feel the weight of being alone. But sometimes, the people we give everything to don't just forget, they take. What began as love and loyalty slowly turned into something far more dangerous, until one moment shattered everything he had spent 17 years building. This is a story of sacrifice without gratitude, of love tested by betrayal, and of the painful truth that the deepest wounds are often inflicted by the ones we trust the most. Some betrayals cut so deep that they rewrite your entire history. Sebastian discovered this truth at 40 years old, sitting across from the little girl he had raised, the sister he had sacrificed everything for, as she calmly told him to step down from the company he built with his own bleeding hands. But this story does not begin with betrayal. It begins with love so fierce it could bend the world, and a promise made over 2 fresh graves on a rain-soaked October afternoon. Sebastian was 23 years old when the police officer knocked on his apartment door at 2 in the morning. He remembers everything about that moment. The flickering hallway light, the officer's apologetic eyes, the way his knees gave out before the words fully registered. Car accident, both parents. Instantly, the drunk driver walked away without a scratch. His mother had been a high school art teacher who painted watercolor landscapes on Sunday mornings. His father had worked at the post office for 27 years and built furniture in the garage on weekends. They were ordinary people living an ordinary life, the kind of gentle existence that never makes headlines but holds entire worlds together. And in one moment, on a wet highway outside Portland, that world shattered into 1,000 irretrievable pieces. Sebastian stumbled through the next week in a fog, funeral arrangements, paperwork, relatives he barely knew offering hollow condolences before returning to their own lives. But there was one face in the crowd that haunted him more than all the rest. Lila, his 12-year-old sister, standing by the graveside in a black dress borrowed from a neighbor, her face blank, her eyes somewhere far away where grief could not touch her. She had not cried, not once, not at the hospital, not at the funeral home, not when they lowered the caskets into the ground. She just stood there, silent and still, like a statue carved from ice. After the service, relatives gathered at the house picking over casseroles and speaking in hushed voices about what would happen to the children. Sebastian overheard his Aunt Martha talking to Uncle Paul in the kitchen. "I could take the girl," Martha said, her voice pitched low. "But I cannot handle 2. My house is too small, and Sebastian is practically an adult anyway." "Foster care might be the best option," Paul replied. "At least until we figure things out." Sebastian felt something shift inside his chest, a door slamming shut, a decision crystallizing with brutal clarity. He walked into that kitchen and looked his aunt straight in the eye. "Nobody is going to foster care," he said quietly. "Lila stays with me." Martha blinked. "Sebastian, honey, you are 23 years old. You are in college. You cannot possibly." "I am her brother," he interrupted. "She stays with me." And that was the end of the discussion. The relatives left. The casseroles ran out. The sympathy cards stopped arriving. And Sebastian stood in the empty house he grew up in, looking at a little girl who would not speak to him, would not cry, would not acknowledge that anything had changed at all. That first year nearly broke him. Sebastian dropped out of Portland State University 3 weeks into the fall semester. He had been studying engineering, carrying a 3.8 grade average, dreaming of designing bridges and buildings. His professor called him into his office and tried to convince him to take a leave of absence instead of withdrawing completely. "You have real talent, Sebastian," Professor Chen had said. "Do not throw that away. We can work something out, financial aid, a lighter course load." But Sebastian just shook his head. "I appreciate that, sir, but I have to work now, full time." He got a job at a shipping warehouse on the edge of town. The work was brutal. 10-hour shifts loading and unloading trucks, his back screaming by the end of each day, his hands covered in calluses and small cuts that never fully healed. But the pay was better than anything else he could find without a degree. He worked the early shift from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, rushed home to make sure Lila got off the school bus safely, helped her with homework, made dinner, and then headed out to his second job. 3 nights a week he worked as a stocker at a 24-hour grocery store, shelving cans and boxes until 2 in the morning. The other nights he drove for a food delivery service, navigating the city streets until exhaustion finally forced him home. He survived on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. His body moved on autopilot, but Lila had clean clothes. Lila had food. Lila's school fees were paid on time. The house was a different story. Sebastian could not afford the mortgage on his warehouse salary, even with the second and third jobs. He sold his car first, a 10-year-old Honda Civic he had bought with summer job money in high school. That bought them 3 months. Then he sold his father's furniture, the beautiful handcrafted pieces his dad had spent years building. That bought them another 2 months. Finally, he accepted the inevitable. They moved out of the childhood home and into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where sirens sang lullabies every night. Lila got the bedroom. Sebastian slept on a couch he found on the curb and repaired with duct tape and hope. But the money was not the hardest part. The hardest part was Lila herself. She had built walls so high that Sebastian could not find a way in. She went to school. She did her homework. She ate the meals he prepared. But she moved through it all like a ghost, present but not really there. She never talked about their parents, never asked questions, never cried. The school counselor called him in for a meeting 6 months after the accident. "Lila is struggling," Mrs. Patterson said, her hands folded on the desk between them. "Her grades are slipping. She does not socialize with other students. She seems very withdrawn." Sebastian rubbed his tired eyes. "I know, I am trying." "Have you considered therapy? There are grief counselors who specialize in children who have lost." "I cannot afford therapy," Sebastian said flatly. "I can barely afford rent." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "There are programs, resources for families in difficult situations. I can help you apply." Sebastian wanted to say yes. He wanted to give Lila every possible tool to heal, but he also knew how those programs worked. Applications, wait lists, interviews, questions about his ability to care for her, questions that might lead to someone deciding that maybe Martha was right, maybe foster care was better. "Thank you," he said carefully, "but we are managing." It was a lie, but it was the lie he had to tell. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in March. Sebastian had just gotten home from his warehouse shift, exhausted and hungry, when he realized he had forgotten to buy groceries. The refrigerator was empty except for condiments and half a carton of milk. He cursed under his breath, grabbed his wallet, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Lila's voice stopped him. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation in weeks. "Grocery store. I forgot to shop yesterday. I will be back in 20 minutes. Can I come?" Sebastian turned to look at her, surprised. "Sure, yeah, of course." They walked to the corner market in silence. Sebastian grabbed a basket and started pulling items off shelves. Pasta, sauce, bread, eggs. Lila followed behind him, quiet but present. At the checkout, the total came to $43. Sebastian's heart sank. He had $40 in his wallet and maybe $2 in change in his pocket. He started putting items back. The nice bread, the fresh vegetables, the orange juice. "What are you doing?" Lila asked. "We do not need all this," Sebastian said, not meeting her eyes. Lila stared at the pile of groceries on the counter. Then she looked at her brother, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since the funeral. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the weight he had lost, the way his shirt hung loose on his frame. Something cracked in her chest. That night, after they ate pasta with jarred sauce at their tiny kitchen table, Lila spoke. "I heard you on the phone last week," she said quietly, "talking to the warehouse manager, asking for more hours." Sebastian set down his fork. "Lila, you dropped out of school for me," she continued, her voice shaking. "You are working all the time. You sold Dad's furniture. You sleep on a broken couch. And I have been acting like none of it matters." "You are 12 years old," Sebastian said gently. "You are allowed to be sad. You are allowed to be angry." "But you lost them too," Lila whispered. And then, finally, she cried. Sebastian moved around the table and pulled her into his arms while she sobbed. He held her while years of frozen grief poured out. He held her until she had nothing left. And when she finally pulled back, her eyes red and swollen, she looked at him with something like determination. "I am going to do better," she said. "In school, at home, I am going to make this worth it." "You already are," Sebastian told her, "just by being here." From that night forward, things changed. Lila threw herself into her studies with fierce intensity. She joined the robotics club. She volunteered at the library. She became the kind of student who made teachers write glowing recommendation letters. And through it all, Sebastian worked. He worked until his body ached and his mind went numb. But now it felt like it meant something. Now he could see the future taking shape. When Lila turned 16, Sebastian gave her their mother's necklace, a simple silver pendant in the shape of a bee that their grandmother had passed down. Lila cried and promised to never take it off. When she graduated high school as valedictorian, Sebastian sat in the audience with tears streaming down his face, thinking about how their parents would have been so proud. When she got accepted to the University of Oregon with a full academic scholarship, Sebastian took her out to dinner at a nice restaurant, the first time they had eaten anywhere fancier than a fast food joint in years. "I did it," Lila said, grinning across the table. "We did it." "You did it," Sebastian corrected. "This is all you." But it was not all her. It was every meal he skipped so she could eat. Every shift he worked while running on fumes. Every dream he buried so hers could breathe. While Lila was in college, Sebastian's life began to shift as well. At 27, he was promoted to warehouse supervisor. The raise was modest, but it meant he could finally quit one of his night jobs. He started taking online business courses in whatever spare time he could find. He had a vision forming in his mind, a better way to run logistics, a more efficient system for managing shipments and inventory. At 29, he took a risk. He borrowed money from the bank, maxed out 3 credit cards, and started his own company, Streamline Logistics. It was just him and 1 truck at first, handling local deliveries for small businesses. But Sebastian had spent years in warehouses. He understood the industry. He knew where the inefficiencies were, and he was willing to work harder than anyone else. The first year was brutal. He almost went bankrupt twice, but he kept going. He built a reputation for reliability, for speed, for caring about the details that other companies ignored. Slowly, clients started coming to him. 1 truck became 3, 3 became 10. By the time Lila graduated college with a degree in business administration, Streamline Logistics had 40 employees and contracts with major retailers across the Pacific Northwest. "I want to work for you," Lila told him at her graduation party. Sebastian hesitated. "You have job offers from bigger companies, better opportunities." "You built this for me," Lila said. "Every single piece of it. Let me help you build it bigger." How could he say no to that? Lila started in operations, learning the business from the ground up. She was smart, driven. She had their father's head for numbers and their mother's creative problem-solving. Within 2 years, she was running the entire operations department. Within 5 years, she was Sebastian's second in command. Sebastian trusted her completely. She was family. She was the reason he had sacrificed everything. Of course, he trusted her. When Lila turned 28, she brought someone to the company holiday party. Dylan, tall, handsome, with an easy smile and a firm handshake. He worked in finance, Lila explained. They had met at a networking event 6 months earlier. "It is serious," she told Sebastian privately. "I think he might be the one." Sebastian wanted to be happy for her, and he was, mostly. But something about Dylan set off quiet alarms in the back of his mind. The way he asked questions about the company. The way his eyes tracked every detail of the warehouse during the tour Lila gave him. The way he smiled just a beat too long, like he was performing interest rather than feeling it. But Sebastian pushed those feelings down. Lila was happy. That was what mattered. They got married a year later in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside the city. Sebastian walked Lila down the aisle, his heart full of complicated emotions. Pride, joy, and underneath it all, a whisper of something he could not quite name. At the reception, Dylan pulled Sebastian aside. "I want you to know," Dylan said, his hand on Sebastian's shoulder, "I am going to take care of her. The way you have all these years. You have been more than a brother to her. You have been a father, I respect that." Sebastian nodded, wanting to believe him. The first year of their marriage seemed fine. Dylan and Lila bought a house in the suburbs. They came to Sunday dinners at Sebastian's place. Everything looked normal. Then small things started to change. Lila began staying later at the office, spending more time on the financial side of the business. She asked to take over vendor contracts. She requested access to accounts she had never managed before. When Sebastian asked why, she smiled and said she wanted to understand every part of the company. "Dylan has been teaching me about financial structures," she explained. "How to maximize efficiency. I think I can save us money." Sebastian agreed. Why would he not? She was brilliant, and she cared about streamline as much as he did. Dylan started showing up at the office too, just to meet Lila for lunch, he said, but he always stayed a little longer, chatted with department heads, asked questions about processes, offered suggestions. "You know," Dylan said one afternoon, leaning against Sebastian's desk, "you could really scale this operation if you restructured your ownership model. Bring in some outside investment, expand into new markets." "I have thought about it," Sebastian replied carefully, "but I like keeping things close, family-owned." Dylan nodded, but his smile tightened. Family-owned is great, but there is only so far you can go without bringing in fresh capital, fresh perspectives. Sebastian said nothing. 6 months into year 2 of the marriage, Lila came to Sebastian with paperwork. "I have been working with Dylan on a proposal," she said, sliding a folder across his desk. "A reorganization plan. It would make the company more agile, better positioned for growth." Sebastian flipped through the pages. Legal language, corporate structures, shares and voting rights and board positions. His head spun trying to follow it all. "This is complicated," he said slowly. "That is why we hired a consultant," Lila said. "Someone Dylan knows. He can walk us through it." The consultant was a sharp-suited man named Marcus, who talked very fast and used words like synergy and optimization. Sebastian sat through the presentation feeling lost, nodding when he thought he should, signing documents that Lila assured him were standard. "This is good for the company," she kept saying. "This protects everyone." Sebastian trusted her, so he signed. Over the next year, more meetings happened. More paperwork appeared. Lila was now handling most of the administrative side of Streamline. She hired new accountants, new lawyers, people Dylan recommended. Sebastian focused on operations, on the parts of the business he understood, while Lila managed the rest. He did not notice when she started making decisions without consulting him. He did not notice when vendor contracts started getting signed by her alone. He did not notice when his name began appearing less and less on official documents. By the time Sebastian turned 39, Streamline Logistics was worth $12 million. It was his legacy, his proof that the sacrifice had meant something, that those years of exhaustion and poverty and pain had built something real. He still lived modestly, still drove a truck that was 8 years old, still worked 60-hour weeks. But he had set up a trust fund for any children Lila might have. He had donated to scholarship programs for kids who lost parents. He had made sure every employee at Streamline had good health insurance and fair wages. This was what success meant to him, taking care of people. He did not see the trap closing until it was too late. It started with small questions he could not answer. An employee asked about a policy change Sebastian had not approved. A vendor called about a terminated contract Sebastian had not authorized. An accountant mentioned a transfer of funds Sebastian did not remember signing off on. Talk to Lila, he kept saying. She handles that side of things. But the questions kept coming, and Sebastian started paying attention. He started reviewing documents he had been too busy to read carefully before. He started tracking the changes that had happened over the past 2 years, and slowly, like puzzle pieces clicking into place, he saw the pattern. Shares had been transferred, not all at once, just small percentages here and there, buried in reorganization agreements and operational updates. Voting rights had shifted. Board positions had been created and filled with people loyal to Lila and Dylan. Control had slipped away so gradually that Sebastian had not noticed it happening. He sat in his office late one night, spreadsheets glowing on his computer screen, and did the math. He no longer had majority control of streamlined logistics. Lila did. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, not the loss of control itself, but what it meant. This had been deliberate, planned, orchestrated over years. His sister, the girl he raised, the person he sacrificed everything for. She had been stealing from him. Sebastian did not confront her, not yet. Instead, he started digging. He hired a private investigator. He brought in a lawyer who specialized in corporate fraud, and what they uncovered made his blood run cold. Dylan had done this before, twice. He married women with family businesses, worked his way into the company structure, and systematically transferred assets. The first woman, a bakery owner in Seattle, had lost everything and ended up filing for bankruptcy. The second, who owned a chain of boutique hotels, was still tied up in lawsuits. Both times, Dylan had walked away clean, protected by complex legal structures that made him look like an innocent advisor. And now he was doing it again, with Lila's help. The question that tortured Sebastian was whether Lila knew about Dylan's past. Was she a victim being manipulated, or was she a willing participant? He got his answer 2 weeks later. Sebastian's investigator managed to recover deleted emails from Lila's work computer. Messages between Lila and Dylan going back 18 months. Messages that made everything clear. "He still has no idea," Lila had written. "He signs whatever I put in front of him. This is almost too easy." "Your brother is a good man," Dylan replied, "which makes him a perfect mark. Good men always trust the people they love." "He sacrificed everything for me," Lila wrote in another message, "and now it is finally paying off, for us." Sebastian read those emails 3 times. Then he closed his laptop and sat in the dark for a very long time. He thought about the 12-year-old girl crying at the kitchen table, the valedictorian speech she gave, the promise she made to make his sacrifice worth it. He thought about every meal he skipped, every dream he buried, every hour of sleep he traded for her future. And he realized something that should have been obvious from the start. People do not owe you gratitude just because you sacrificed for them. They do not owe you loyalty just because you love them. And sometimes the people you save become the people who destroy you. Sebastian could have burned it all down right then. He had evidence of fraud, of forged signatures, of manipulated documents. He could have gone to the police, could have sued, could have made sure Lila and Dylan paid for what they did. But instead, he made a different choice. He started building a trap. Sebastian was not a lawyer, but he had learned enough over the years to understand how corporate structures worked. And he still had a few cards left to play. The original incorporation documents for streamlined logistics had been filed in his name alone. That foundational ownership could not be transferred without his explicit consent in front of a notary. Everything Lila and Dylan had done was built on top of that foundation. And Sebastian realized he could pull the foundation out from under them. Working with his lawyer in complete secrecy, Sebastian created a new legal structure, a clause buried deep in the corporate bylaws that would trigger under specific circumstances. Any transfer of ownership made under conflict of interest, any signature obtained through manipulation or fraud, any attempt to remove the original founder from operational control without proper legal process. If those conditions were met, every transfer would automatically reverse. Every share would return to Sebastian's name. and a full legal investigation would be launched. Then Sebastian did something brilliant. He baited the trap. He started acting tired, distracted. He made small mistakes in meetings. He forgot details. He let Lila see him struggling. "You are working too hard," she said one afternoon, her voice full of false concern. "You need to slow down, delegate more." "Maybe you are right," Sebastian said, rubbing his temples. "I am not as young as I used to be." He could see the calculation in her eyes, the opportunity. 2 months later, Lila came to his office with Dylan. Both of them wore expressions of rehearsed sympathy. "We need to talk," Lila said. She slid a folder across his desk. Sebastian opened it slowly, even though he knew exactly what it would say. "What is this?" "A proposal," Dylan said smoothly, "for your retirement." "I am 40 years old," Sebastian said. "Which is exactly why you should enjoy life," Lila jumped in. "You have worked so hard for so long, you deserve to rest, to travel, to actually live." Sebastian flipped through the papers. They were offering him a buyout, a generous one on paper. Enough money to live comfortably, but not nearly what his shares were actually worth. "We would keep you on as a consultant," Dylan added. "You would still have a voice, but Lila would take over day-to-day operations. It is time for the next generation to lead." Sebastian looked at his sister, the woman he raised, the person who had just tried to rob him blind. "Can I think about it?" he asked quietly. "Of course," Lila said, smiling. "Take all the time you need." But 3 days later, she was back, more insistent. "We need an answer, Sebastian. The company is at a critical point. We have opportunities we cannot delay on." "Opportunities?" Sebastian asked. "Investors, partnerships, growth potential, but we need clear leadership to move forward." Sebastian saw through it now. They wanted him gone before he could figure out what they had done, before he could unwind their scheme. "All right," he said finally. "I will do it." Lila's face lit up. "Really?" "Really, you are right, it is time." The paperwork was drawn up within a week. Sebastian signed his name on every line, his hand steady, his face blank. Lila could barely contain her excitement. Dylan watched with quiet satisfaction. That night, according to the emails Sebastian's investigator later recovered, Lila and Dylan celebrated with expensive champagne. "We did it," Lila had texted. "He actually signed. Everything is ours." "I told you he would," Dylan replied. "He is too soft, too sentimental. He could never see you for what you really are." "What am I?" Lila wrote. "A survivor," Dylan answered. "Just like me." Sebastian's official last day was set for 2 weeks later. In that time, Lila began making changes. She fired 3 long-time employees who had been loyal to Sebastian. She canceled vendor contracts and replaced them with companies Dylan had connections to. She started talking about taking the company public, about expansion plans that would have made her very rich. She was so focused on the future she was building that she did not notice the present collapsing around her. It started small. A vendor called saying their payment had been rejected. Lila called the bank and was told the account was frozen. She assumed it was a mistake, called again, was transferred to the fraud department. "There is an investigation," the representative said. "All accounts associated with Streamline Logistics are on hold pending legal review." "What investigation?" Lila demanded. "I cannot discuss details, ma'am. You will need to speak with your corporate attorney." Lila hung up and immediately called their lawyer, the one Dylan had recommended. The call went straight to voicemail. Then the emails started coming. Vendors threatening to sue for breach of contract. Employees asking why their paychecks had not cleared. Partners wanting to know why Streamline was suddenly non-responsive. Dylan rushed to the office. Together, they started digging through files, trying to understand what was happening. That was when Dylan found it. The clause, buried in the incorporation documents. The trap that Sebastian had built months ago. "What is this?" Dylan whispered, his face going pale. Lila read over his shoulder. With every line, her stomach dropped further. Every transfer they had made, every share they thought they owned, every piece of control they had carefully stolen. None of it was real. It had all reverted to Sebastian's name, the moment Lila had forced him to step down under false pretenses. And there was more. Documentation of every forged signature, every manipulated document, every fraudulent transfer. Sebastian had been collecting evidence the entire time, building a case, and now it was all being handed over to federal investigators. Lila's hands shook as she reached for her phone. She called Sebastian. He did not answer. She called again and again. Finally, on the 5th try, he picked up. "What did you do?" she screamed into the phone. "I protected what was mine," Sebastian said calmly. "What I built, what I earned." "You cannot do this. That company is as much mine as yours." "No, Lila," Sebastian said, his voice hard. "It was never yours. I gave you a job, I gave you opportunity, I gave you trust, and you tried to steal it all." "I deserve it," Lila shouted. "After everything you put me through, you made me live in that horrible apartment, you made me watch you struggle, you made me feel guilty for existing." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. "I never made you feel anything," he said finally. "I kept you alive, I kept you safe, I gave you a future, and apparently that was my mistake." "Sebastian, please," Lila's voice cracked. "We can fix this, we can work this out." "There is nothing to work out. The lawyers will be in touch." He hung up. Lila stood in the office she thought she owned, in the company she thought she had conquered, and watched her entire world disintegrate. The legal consequences came swiftly. The fraud investigation uncovered everything: forged documents, manipulated transfers, financial misconduct. Dylan's past caught up with him, and this time he could not slip away. He was arrested within a week. Lila was not charged criminally, but the civil suits buried her. She lost her position at Streamline, lost her house, lost her savings fighting lawyers. Dylan divorced her from jail, taking whatever assets she had left in the settlement. She ended up in a studio apartment across town, working as a bookkeeper for a small firm, her business degree and her ambitions reduced to filing expense reports. 3 months after everything collapsed, Lila showed up at Streamline. Security almost did not let her in, but Sebastian had left word that if she came, she should be allowed into his office. She sat across from him, looking small and hollow. "Why?" she asked quietly. "After everything, after all those years, why would you do this to me?" Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. She looked different now, older, smaller. The confidence and fire that had burned in her eyes were gone, replaced by something broken. "I did not do this to you," he said quietly. "I protected what I built, from the moment I realized you were trying to take it from me." Tears filled her eyes. "But I am your sister." "Are you?" Sebastian asked. "Because sisters do not betray the people who raised them. They do not conspire to steal everything their brother sacrificed for. They do not look at 20 years of love and care and decide it is something they can exploit." "I was angry," Lila whispered. "At you, at the world, at what our lives became after they died. You made all these choices for both of us and I never got a say." "You were 12, Sebastian said. "What choice did you want? To go into foster care, to be separated, to end up in a system that did not care about you? Maybe that would have been better than spending my whole life feeling like I owed you everything." The words hung in the air like poison. Sebastian leaned back in his chair. "I never asked you to feel that way. I never asked for gratitude. I just wanted you to be okay, to have a life." "But I lived in your shadow," Lila said, her voice breaking. "Everything I did was because of you. Everything I accomplished was because you sacrificed for it. I was never my own person. I was just the girl Sebastian saved." "So you decided to destroy me," Sebastian said flatly. "That was your solution, to take everything I built and pretend you did it yourself." Lila looked down at her hands. Dylan said. "Dylan is a con artist who has done this twice before," Sebastian interrupted. "He saw you coming from a mile away, a successful woman with family money and emotional baggage. You were perfect for him." "I know that now," Lila whispered. "Do you?" Sebastian asked. Because the emails I read did not sound like someone being manipulated. They sounded like someone who knew exactly what she was doing and enjoyed it. Lila flinched. You read my emails. I read everything, every message, every plan, every moment you and Dylan celebrated stealing from me. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I am sorry. Sorry that you got caught, Sebastian said. Not sorry for what you did. That is not fair. Fair, Sebastian's voice rose for the first time. You want to talk about fair? I was 23 years old, Lila. I had a future. I had dreams. I had a whole life ahead of me and I gave it all up. For you. I worked jobs that broke my body. I lived on nothing so you could have everything. I turned myself inside out making sure you never felt the pain of being alone. And you repaid me by trying to erase me. I know, Lila sobbed. I know what you did. I know what you gave up. No, Sebastian said quietly. You do not. Because if you really knew, if you really understood what those years cost me, you never could have done this. Lila looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. Can we ever fix this? Is there any way back? Sebastian was quiet for a long time. He thought about the little girl crying at the kitchen table, the teenager who promised to make his sacrifice worth it, the woman sitting across from him now, broken and desperate. I do not know, he said finally. I do not know if I have forgiveness left in me. You did not just betray me, Lila. You killed something. You took every good memory, every moment of hope from those years, and you made them mean nothing. They were not nothing, Lila said desperately. You saved me. You gave me a life. And you threw it back in my face. Lila stood up slowly. She looked around the office one last time. I will pay you back, she said. However long it takes, whatever I have to do, I will make this right. You cannot, Sebastian said. There is no amount of money that makes this right. There is no apology that fixes it. Some things, once broken, stay broken. Lila walked to the door, then paused. Do you remember Mom's necklace, the bee pendant? You are still wearing it, Sebastian said, noticing it for the first time. I never took it off, Lila said. Even through everything, even when Dylan told me to sell it because we needed money, I kept it, because it reminded me of who I was supposed to be, the person you believed I could become. She touched the silver bee at her throat. I lost her, somewhere along the way. I lost the girl you raised and I became this, someone who could hurt you, and I do not know how to find my way back. Maybe you cannot, Sebastian said. Maybe this is who you are now, and you have to live with that. Lila nodded slowly. Maybe you are right. She left without another word. Sebastian sat alone in his office as the sun set over the city. Streamline logistics was his again. Fully, completely, he had won. But it felt nothing like victory. He thought about calling someone, a friend, a date, anyone to fill the silence. But the truth was there was nobody. He had spent 20 years building a company and raising a sister, and in the process, he had not built a life. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph. Him and Lila at her college graduation, both of them grinning, his arm around her shoulders. She was wearing the bee necklace. He remembered thinking in that moment that it had all been worth it, every sacrifice, every hard year, because look what they had built together. That person in the photo felt like a stranger now. Sebastian put the photo back in the drawer and locked it. The next morning, he came into the office and got to work. There was a company to rebuild, employees who depended on him, contracts to fulfill. Life did not stop just because your heart was broken. Over the following months, Streamline stabilized. Sebastian hired new management, people he vetted carefully, people with no personal connection to him. He implemented new oversight protocols. He would never be blindsided again. Lila kept her word in her own way. Every month, a small check arrived. $50, $100 when she could spare it. Payments on a debt that could never be repaid. Sebastian did not cash them. He put them in a folder in his desk and tried not to think about what they meant. A year after everything fell apart, Sebastian turned 41. He took the day off, something he never did, and drove out to the cemetery where his parents were buried. He had not been there in years. He stood at their graves and tried to explain what had happened, tried to say out loud all the things that were tangled in his chest, but the words would not come. Finally, he just said, "I tried. I did everything I could. It was not enough." The wind rustled through the trees. Nobody answered. Sebastian drove home as the sun set, the city lights flickering on one by one. He thought about Lila in her studio apartment, about Dylan in prison, about all the ways love could twist into something unrecognizable. He thought about the girl who promised to make his sacrifice worth it. And he thought about the woman who decided that the best way to honor that sacrifice was to destroy the man who made it. Some betrayals do not come from enemies. They come from the people you would die for, the people you already did die for in all the ways that matter. And the cruelest part is that even after they take everything, even after they prove that your sacrifice meant nothing to them, you cannot stop loving them. You cannot stop wishing things were different. You cannot stop being the person who would have given up the world to keep them safe. Sebastian pulled into his driveway and sat in his truck for a long time, staring at the house he had bought last year. Big enough for a family he would probably never have, empty enough to echo. He thought about going inside, making dinner, watching television until he could sleep, waking up tomorrow and doing it all again. This was victory. This was success. This was what 20 years of sacrifice had earned him. He sat in the dark and wondered if it was worth it. And he knew, with a certainty that ached in his bones, that he would make the same choices all over again. Not because they led somewhere good, not because they were rewarded, but because at 23 years old, standing in that kitchen with his aunt talking about foster care, he had made a promise. To keep Lila safe, to give her a future, to make sure she never felt alone. He had kept that promise, and it had destroyed him. But some promises are worth keeping, even when they cost you everything. Even when the person you made them for does not remember, does not care, does not understand what they took from you. Sebastian got out of the truck and walked into his empty house. Tomorrow, he would go back to work. He would build the company stronger. He would keep moving forward. But tonight, he let himself grieve. Not just for Lila, not just for the relationship they would never get back, but for the 23-year-old boy who thought love and sacrifice would be enough. Who thought that if he just tried hard enough, worked long enough, gave enough of himself away, everything would turn out all right. That boy was gone now. And Sebastian was not sure he would ever forgive his sister for being the one who killed him.